Welcome to Season 2, Episode 13. We're talking about Levi Strauss. I really wanted to take time to thank you for making this show a top 5 show. Currently number 2 in the UK, which is unbelievable. 17 in the United States, 43 worldwide. And that's you. That is you liking, that is you subscribing, that is you leaving comments. Then we're close to 2,000. That is 20-something thousand or 30-something thousand of you. I can't keep my head around the numbers. Thank you for sharing these stories. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your LinkedIn requests. I'm blown away by it. And I don't think it's me. I think it's the stories. I think they resonate. I think they allow you to learn something in a time when it feels like you only learn something so that the law of reciprocity will kick in, so that I can say, okay, now you've learned something. Will you go and buy something of mine or use the affiliate code below? And for that, I just wanted to say thank you. As you know, the show is very much about me learning as well as teaching or reminding or explaining. But I put my name on it because I wanted it to be the best I could do to teach in a way that I learn and explain it through stories. Because I think that's what we've been doing around Fireplaces since the beginning of time. So, where in Season 1, you would have heard me start every episode by saying, hi, I'm Jason Allen Scott. I have started 11 businesses. I have successfully exited or been involved in 9 exits with 1 fiasco company. And I owe everything I have got that I would be thankful for through seeing the world through a philosophical lens, which is that of entrepreneurship. I believe it can save your life and the lives of those you love and trust. And that's why I built this show. And that's why these stories matter. And that's why I am putting in the time, the effort, the work, the money to bring these to you. And if you do enjoy them, please share them with one person. The goal of this show is to save one person's life, to make one person's life better. That's it. That's what it is. And so, yeah, that's my ask. Now, to get to it. What if the real barrier to building something meaningful isn't lack of opportunity, but lack of patience to become the person who can recognize it? That's today's story. Levi Strauss. He spent 20 years learning the dry goods business before a tailor wrote him a letter about riveting pants. 20 years of shipping fabric, 20 years of understanding customers, 20 years of building specific knowledge that looked to everyone else just selling cloth. But when that letter arrived, a proposal split, a patent 50-50 with a stranger, Levi decided in just 21 days, not 3 months, not 3 years, not 3 weeks, because he'd already done the work. I'm your host, and today we're talking about the most dangerous misconception in entrepreneurship, that preparation and opportunity are separate things. And I believe they are not. This book proves they are not. Preparation is opportunity. You just can't see it until you're ready. And Levi Strauss, he got ready by doing something most of us refuse to do. He waited. Today we're studying Levi Strauss. And I need to be clear about what this story is not. This is not about your blue jeans. This is about, and this is not about a logo or a brand or a product innovation that changed fashion. This is about something far more fundamental. The compounding returns of specific knowledge applied over decades. And the source material, as always, comes from a book. And this book is called Levi Strauss, The Man Who Gave Blue Jeans to the World by Lynn Downey. Downey was the company historian for Levi Strauss & Company. She spent years reconstructing the story from shipping manifests, public records, and personal letters because a fire in 1906 destroyed most of the company's original documents. But what emerges is a founder story unlike any that I've studied before for this show, or without the show, just in life. Because Levi didn't invent jeans. He didn't even come up with the idea of riveted pants. What Levi did was position himself through 2 decades of relentless patient work to recognize an opportunity when it appeared and execute on it faster than anyone else could. This is a story about constraints creating clarity, about family as a competitive advantage, about the difference between movement and progress. We've talked about constraints as a feature with the previous episode, talking about Evan Spiegel of Snapchat. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, please do. It's an incredible episode and one I think you'll get a lot of learning from before you begin this one with Levi Strauss. Let's start where every great entrepreneurial story starts, with someone who had no other choice but to build. It was Bavaria. It was 1840. And freedom was illegal. Levi Strauss, or as his real name, Lob, as he was born, grew up in the Kingdom of Bavaria under something called the matriarchal paragrafen. The English translation, by the way, is Jew law. I want you to really sit with what this meant, because it's a perfect example of how constraints shape entrepreneurial thinking. The Bavarian government decided which professions Jewish people could practice and what they couldn't. They couldn't be peddlers anymore. They were reserved for Christians. They had to become farmers, tanners, weavers, cobblers, and soap makers. And it wasn't just occupational control. The government also controlled who they could marry, how many could gather in one place, where they could worship, whether their rabbi could speak German. Lynn Downey writes, Jews had only those rights that made the Bavarian government and Christian society comfortable. For over 700 years, Jewish people in this region were repeatedly expelled or exterminated, allowed to return, then forced to leave again. By the time Lob was born in 1829, they were allowed to stay, but only on the government's terms. His father was a peddler, a door-to-door salesman, too poor to have a store, but doing well enough to support a family of 8 or 10 by carrying everything he sold on his back. And then the Jew law made it illegal to do this. Nearly 50 years old when Lob was born, his father couldn't learn a new profession. His sons, however, had no choice. They had to do something. They were expected to become farmers or craftsmen, anything but what their father did. And even worse, the marriage restrictions meant most young Jewish men were ineligible as husbands. They were only eligible with women who weren't immediately claimed. Downey describes it perfectly. He said the Jew law was designed to make proper civilians of Bavarian Jews, and it did for the United States. Because faced with these constraints, thousands made the only rational choice they could at the time. They left. Lob's father dies. His mother, Rebecca, remarries. And then that husband dies too. Now she's a double widow with no adult male children to protect her in a society that gave her no legal standing. Rebecca made the decision that would alter her family trajectory forever. It's time to go west. It's time to move to America. But leaving Bavaria, well, that's not simple. It requires petitioning the government, proving you weren't or wouldn't become a burden on your destination country, getting approval that could take years. As someone who made the move from South Africa to England, this is a very similar story to my own, of thinking, as a poor white with a certain accent that I had at the time, and with the choices that I had, I believed my only option was to leave. And then coming to the UK, where I'm recording this currently, there were a lot of laws and rules about what I could and couldn't do, or I would lose my chance of something called indefinite leave to remain, or to become a citizen. Did you hear that for a split second? I got very South African. If I say the word South African or think South African too many times, I immediately transport myself back. It is very strange. Apparently it's an autistic thing, mimicking or camouflaging or masking. Anyway, back to Loeb. Here's what 17-year-old Loeb wrote in his petition to immigrate. He said, "The favorable news that I've received from my stepbrothers in America has convinced me to follow them, even though I do not have at this time a specific occupation. But my brothers will take care of that. No members of my family will stay behind. I will share the fate that has been assigned to me with them in foreign lands. I thus join in my mother's plea. I will share their fate that has been assigned to me with them in foreign lands." He's not talking about opportunity. He's talking about survival. He's talking about the fundamental need for agency, the ability to make your own way in the world without ridiculous constraints. Naval talks about how the best entrepreneurs are driven by a desire to create value, not extract it. But before you can create value, you need something more fundamental. You need freedom, economic autonomy, the right to participate in commerce, the ability to choose your own work, your own partners, your own path. This is what Levi was seeking, and it's what drove him, along with his mother and younger sister, to get on board a boat that might sink, that might disappear, that might leave them at the bottom of the Atlantic with hundreds of others desperate people seeking the same thing. I want to spend a moment on this absolute brutality of his journey because it illustrates something we often miss about historical entrepreneurs. The barriers to entry were incomprehensibly higher than they are today. The voyage from Bavaria to New York could take 3 to 6 months, depending on weather and the route that they were on. Passengers were crammed into uncomfortable quarters below deck. Downey writes, not even the largest chamber pot could hold the volume of vomit that accompanied the seasickness in the first few weeks on the water. Ships would frequently sink. Storms killed entire passenger lists. Disease, especially cholera, spread through their cramped quarters. And yet the conditions in Bavaria were so unbearable that Rebecca Strauss willingly risked not only her own life, but the lives of her children just to escape. I mentioned this in the introduction, but it bears repeating. I know this feeling. I was willing to live on the streets in any country. I at one point was thinking about going to Mexico and throwing my passport away, or going to Thailand and throwing my passport away, and go to Taiwan and throw my passport. That was like my storyline. I had to get out. I could not see my life in South Africa. I was seen as either a white guy, so he must have money. I did not. Or I was seen as a poor white, which is the worst of the whites. My own government said there were only 7,000 of us at the time. I lived in a housing project. I actually did have a house, though. Everyone else was in flats, Albert Gardens, for those who remember. And there were 8 of us in a 2-bedroom. And that was the only thing I wanted. Get out, get out. Even when my father got money and we got to move and I got to live in Sea Point, which is far better than Rugby, I still wanted to leave. Even when I built my company and I got to move and I was on Clifton Third Beach in St. Moritz, I still wanted to leave. I just wanted my own choices. I knew that staying would be the worst thing in the world. I'd already been shot at 12. I had seen my friends go through terrible things. I did not want that for myself, and I was willing to die by trying. I know what it's like for people to die to try. My best friend growing up died trying. We all know the risks, whether it's myself or Loeb. We all know that many have failed, but the alternative, to stay in a place where you have no freedom, no economic freedom, no ability to build, no agency over your life, is worse than the risk of death itself for people like me and Loeb. It is the universal human desire that animates every founder story, the story of autonomy, not wealth, not fame, not even success in the traditional sense of the word, just the freedom to build, the freedom to try, to make our own way, to not be judged. Levi Strauss arrived in New York in 1848 with his mother and sister. His stepbrothers were already there, having made the journey years earlier. And they'd started as peddlers, eventually working their way up to a storefront. Now they were in the dry goods business, textiles, garments, fabrics. And young Loeb, he would soon Americanize his name to Levi and was about to begin his apprenticeship in the industry that would define his entire life. New York, 1848, the education begins. From the day he arrives in America, Levi's life becomes what Downey calls a round of family workshops and nose to the grindstone application to learning English in every detail of the dry goods business. Dry goods is not just a term we use, by the way, today, but in the 1800s it meant consumer goods, distinct from hardware or groceries. It was basically textiles, garments, and fabric. And the Strauss family, this was their business, and it wasn't glamorous, not revolutionary. It was just commerce. Levi didn't spend his time in New York looking for the next big thing. He wasn't trying to identify emerging markets or predict trends. He was just building a specific knowledge. Remember how we define specific knowledge. It's knowledge that you cannot be trained for. If society can train you, they can train someone else and replace you. Specific knowledge is built on the intersection of your natural talents and your genuine obsessions, developed over years of practice, that looks like work to others but feels like play to you. For me, that's podcasting. But for Levi, that knowledge was dry goods. He learned which fabrics held well under stress, which suppliers were reliable, which customers paid on time, how to ship goods across long distances, how to manage inventory, how to extend credit, how to build relationships with retailers, how to read what customers actually needed versus what they said they wanted. This wasn't taught in a classroom. This was years of observation, conversation, experimentation, and pattern recognition. And while Levi was building his knowledge base in New York, something else was happening 3,000 miles away that would create the opportunity of multitudes of lifetimes. January 24th, 1848, the gold rush begins. James Marshall, a Midwest native and amateur geologist, is working on the tail race of a sawmill that he's building for Swiss entrepreneur John Sutter of the American River near Sacramento. And he looks into a small, still pool, and he puts his hand into the freezing water, and he brings out nuggets that would ignite one of the greatest mass migrations in history, the Californian gold rush. After reporters begin to write in February 19th, 1852, about this California gold rush, it becomes more than a passing fad, especially when the New York Times writes all about it. Here then is a limitless opening for industry and talent. Industry and talent, not luck, not gold. See, the smart merchants realized something immediately. The best way to make money in mining was not to squat in a snow-fed river, but to have dry clothes ready for those who did. This is what we now call pickaxe retailing. In a gold rush, you sell pickaxes and promises of gold. But it's more than that, it's leverage. If you pan for gold, your upside is capped by your own physical labor. You can only sit and sift for so much in a day. But if you sell tools to everyone panning for gold, your upside is multiplied by every person who needs what you're selling, who is in the hunt and in the hope of finding gold. This is leverage through distribution, through systems, through understanding what people actually need and will pay for. And the Strauss family, already deep in the dry goods business, was perfectly positioned to capitalize on this opportunity. But they needed someone in California, someone they could trust, someone who understood the business deeply enough to make decisions independently. And they chose Levi. The journey to California, path dangers, strategies. In 1853, at the young age of 23, Levi Strauss prepared to make the journey to San Francisco. He had 5 years of New York dry goods experience under his belt. He was unmarried, he was young enough to handle the journey, but old enough to be trusted with very serious responsibility. The fact that they did send the youngest brother on what was known to be a dangerous journey and risky commercial undertaking meant that his much older brothers had complete confidence in his abilities, is what the book says. And let me give you context of how dangerous this journey was. There were 3 ways to get from the East Coast to California in 1853. Option 1 was the clipper ship, which went around Cape Horn, 3 to 6 months at sea. Frigid cold, searing heat. The rounding of Cape Horn was so horrific it inspired dozens of seafaring songs with refrains like, "I wish to God I'd never been born to drag my carcass across Cape Horn." Option 2, overland from Missouri. You get to a jumping off point like St. Joseph or Independence, Missouri, a hard trek on its own. But then you have to cross the unmarked trails which was scarce of water, who had Native Americans attacking. There was disease, there was cholera that claimed more lives than historians have ever been able to capture or work out. Then there's option 3, Panama. That's the fastest route. This is the route that Levi would choose himself. You took a steamship from New York through the Caribbean to Panama's eastern coastline. Then passengers loaded into the flat-bottom boats piloted by indigenous people, taking an average of 2 days and nights up the Chagres River. Then you either rented a mule or walked the final 18 miles to Panama City through narrow canyons and dense jungle where highway hitmen hid, say that 10 times fast, and would rob you blindly. Finally, you would wait, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, for another steamer to pass to take you to San Francisco. By the time Levi made the journey in 1853, the Panama Railroad was partially completed, so the crossing was a little bit more organized, but it was still incredibly dangerous. Downey notes in her notes, robberies and murders happened on the trails at all times of the year, though mostly targeted those going home from the goldfields, their packs full of plunder from the American River. Spoiler alert, Levi survived. The alligators, the yellow fever, the robbers, the heat, the jungle, he survived it all. And he arrived in San Francisco on Valentine's Day in 1853. In years where entrepreneurship gets real. Starting cold, building a business from nothing. Levi had no contacts in San Francisco. Zero, nada, naught. He'd arranged for his brother to ship dry goods from New York, but those shipments wouldn't arrive for 3 months. They were coming by sea, the same route he had just taken. So what did he do? What could he do? He hit the pavement. Downey writes, the easiest and most efficient way to get started was simply to call on the retailers already established in San Francisco, door to door like his father. Retailers, hotels, restaurants. Hey, I'm a wholesaler. I can supply you with dry goods from New York. Let's build a relationship. Very similar to Phil Knight going to Japan and doing the same thing with factories for Blue Ribbon Industries. That's it. That's all he had. No warm introductions, no networking events, no venture capital, no accelerators, no incubators, just work. And it worked. I always say this, it works when you work it. I think Alcoholics Anonymous said it first, but I say it often. Anyway, by July 1855, 2 years after arriving, Levi shipped his first payment of gold back to New York to fill the coffers of J. Strauss and Brothers, which is his family's company, and to pay for future shipments. That month, he sent $10,041, equivalent of nearly $250,000 today, back home. The following year, despite a financial panic that caused nearly 200 bankruptcies in San Francisco, Levi shipped over $200,000 in gold to New York, worth today $5 million. And here's what's remarkable about surviving the panic of 1855. Most wholesalers needed credit from Eastern suppliers. When banks failed and credit dried up, those wholesalers couldn't get inventory. They just went bankrupt. But Levi's suppliers, well, they were his family. He didn't need credit from strangers. He didn't have to worry about his credit rating, which, by the way, would have been marked with warnings by companies like Dun & Bradstreet because he was Jewish. And this is a perfect example of playing long-term games with long-term people. Levi was playing an infinite game with his family. He had aligned incentives. He had complete trust, and he had shared upside. When crisis hit, the structure saved him. And it illustrates a principle we'll see again and again and again in these founder stories. Independence beats optimization. Levi could have optimized for slightly cheaper suppliers, slightly better terms, slightly higher margins. But he optimized for something far more valuable. Control over his supply chain and alignment with people who would never abandon him when times got hard. And if you remember from season 1, this is the Ford lesson. This is the Rockefeller lesson. This is the Jobs lesson. Vertical integration isn't about efficiency. It's about resilience. The cost of building and the catastrophic losses. I want to pause and talk about something we don't discuss enough, the absolute brutality of building businesses in the 1800s. In August 1857, Levi's arranged to ship goods and gold worth $2 million in today's money on a boat called the Central America. In October, he found out the Central America had gone down in a hurricane just 130 miles off the narrow North Carolina shore. Over 400 passengers had died, and all the cargo and treasure was lost. The total damage to San Francisco merchants was $40 million in today's currency. And guess what? That triggered another financial panic. Banks tightened credits, depositors withdrew their accounts. The entire American economy shriveled. And it took 2 years to recover. But Levi survived. And then it happened again. The great steamer, the Golden Gate, it caught fire. Another $2 million in today's money, gone. It's catastrophic, real catastrophic losses that would destroy most, if not all, businesses. But Levi kept building because he understood something most people miss about long-term gains. Setbacks are tuition, not sentences. You don't optimize for avoiding losses. You optimize for being robust enough to be able to absorb them. Nassim Taleb calls this anti-fragility, systems that get stronger from shocks. Well, Levi's system was anti-fragile because his suppliers was his family that had aligned incentives. He had no external debt to service. He'd built deep customer relationships over years. He understood his market better than anyone. So when ships went down, he rebuilt. When panic hit, he survived. When competitors failed, he gained market share. And this is the compounding return of patience. Every year you survive makes the next year easier. During the entire period, Levi was learning something most people never learn: what customers actually need versus what they say they need. And Downey describes the economy at the time perfectly. Customers who shopped at the retail stores in the mountain towns paid for their purchases in gold dust. The store owners would use the dust to pay their own suppliers. Levi would have a scale in his office to weigh gold dust and figure out its value according to its purity and the current rate at the time. And generally, gold dust circulated at like $17.50 an ounce in those early years. But after weighing and measuring the dust, Levi could use it to pay off his customers' miscellaneous bills. He could deposit the remainder into their account as credit against future business. Basically, what we're saying is Levi and other merchants acted as bankers for their own customers. So Levi wasn't just a wholesaler. He was a financial intermediary, a credit provider, a trusted partner in a system where the trust was the only currency that mattered more than gold. This is specific knowledge in action. Understanding not just the product you sell, but the entire ecosystem in which your customers operate. Their constraints, their cash flow, their incentives, their actual problems, not the ones they tell you about, but the ones you observe by watching how they behave. And by the end of 1850s, Levi had built a successful wholesale business. He was expanding into real estate. He was buying stock. He was engaging in philanthropy. He was getting interested in politics. And then in 1872, 20 years after arriving in California, a letter arrived that would change everything. The overnight success that took 20 years. The inventor who needed a partner, Jacob Davies, liked to tinker. He too was a Jewish immigrant like Levi. He'd started in the clothing business but had bounced between 5 or 6 different ventures, and none of them were particularly successful. By trade, he was a tailor, but he was always thinking about how to improve things, how to make things better, how to solve real problems. In the spring of 1868, a massive silver discovery was made in Nevada, and another rush had just begun. And Jacob realized he could take advantage of making tents, wagon covers, and horse blankets for the miners. He used a fabric called duck, or ducking, basically a sturdily woven cotton, similar to canvas, but much, much stronger. And sometimes he'd also use denim. But Jacob didn't know where to buy more fabric locally. He'd heard about Levi Strauss and Company, though, and through relatives which purchased from Levi in San Francisco, Jacob was able to get this fabric that he needed to try. Then one day in the 1870s, something happened that would change everyone's life. An accident that basically created an industry. A woman came into Jacob's tailoring shop. Her husband needed a pair of cheap pants. He'd worn out his last pair and literally couldn't leave the house because he had nothing to wear. And Downey writes the scene perfectly. The woman told Jacob her husband was really rough on his trousers, and she asked him to make the pants as strong as possible. Jacob was making horse blankets at the time, using rivets to attach the straps. Those rivets happened to be lying on his table when he was making those pants. And then he thought, what if I use these rivets to reinforce the pockets? And so he did. The husband wore the pants around town. People saw them and asked where they could get a pair. Jacob started making more. The demand was immediate. Downey quotes Jacob's recollection. I was making horse blankets and covers for teamsters at the time and had used rivets for the strips in the blankets. Those straps were not sewn with seams, they were riveted together. So when the pants were done, the rivets were lying on the table. And the thought just struck me to fasten the pockets with these rivets. I'd never done that before. I'd never thought of that before. And this is how innovation actually happens. Not in a lab, not through market research, not through design thinking workshops, but through tinkering, through solving an immediate problem for a specific customer, to being in the area and the arena long enough that random accidents reveal new possibilities. Jacob knew he'd stumbled onto something valuable, but he had a problem. The wife who said no more. Jacob wanted to patent his riveted pants, but his wife Anne was at her wit's end. He'd already sunk time and money into multiple inventions that had never panned out. She was tired of the cycle, new idea, new investment, new returns. And then no returns. In tears, she begged Jacob not to go down that road again. But Jacob knew this was different. He was afraid someone would steal his idea, and he was certain, truly certain, that this was the money maker. This was the legacy maker. So he made a decision. He'd get a partner. He wouldn't do it alone this time. Someone who could pay for the patent, someone who understood the clothing business, someone with distribution, someone with capital and credibility. So he wrote to Levi Strauss. They already had a business relationship. Jacob had been ordering fabric from Levi for over 2 years, but this was different. Jacob proposed an idea. I'll give you 50% if you pay for the patent and materials. Levi responded in 21 days. 3 weeks. The deal was done. Why 3 weeks, you might be asking? Well, that is the power of a prepared mind. Most people read that and think, wow, Levi was decisive, but they miss the real story. Levi didn't make a snap decision. He made a prepared decision. And let me explain the difference. In the book, Downey writes, nothing in his actions indicates that he sought out risk for its own sake, but he knew the clothing business and he knew it from the hem up. And this is the line you need to pay attention to. When Levi's deep knowledge of his customers' needs met Jacob's riveted pants, it's no wonder Levi jumped at the opportunity and made his decision so quickly. By 1872, Levi had been importing and distributing a vast array of clothing and dry goods for 20 solid years. His retail base stretched from Montana, Nevada, Arizona, California, and the Pacific Northwest to Canada, Mexico, Hawaii, and Japan. He knew what kind of people needed. He knew what kind of people needed what kind of clothing and where they needed it. This is the compounding return of specific knowledge. Levi could evaluate Jacob's proposal in 3 weeks, not because he was impulsive, but because he'd already spent 2 decades learning everything he needed to know to recognize whether this was a real opportunity. He knew who his customers were: miners, teamsters, laborers, what they needed, durable work pants, what they'd pay for, how to manufacture it, how to distribute it, how to market it. So when Jacob wrote with a simple innovation, rivets to reinforce pockets, Levi didn't need months or years of analysis. He just knew. And this is what Louis Pasteur meant when he said, chance favors the prepared mind. Levi's mind was prepared by 20 years of relentless focus on one industry. May 20th, 1873. On May 20th, 1873, Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis received US patent number 139121. Try and remember that when you have calculexia. A patent on pocket openings. And the patent gave them a 17-year monopoly on riveted clothing. Jacob handled design and production, and Levi would handle manufacturing, distribution, and sales. The wholesale price was $19.50 per 12, with Levi Strauss & Company seeing between 33% and 40% profit margins. Compare that to today with a typical dry goods margin of 10 to 15%. This is what monopoly power looks like: the ability to capture value proportional to the value you create. And here's what I want you to notice. Levi didn't create the innovation. Jacob did. But Levi had the distribution, the capital, the credibility, and the systems. Innovation without distribution is invention. Innovation with distribution is revolution. When Levi and Jacob discussed their patent riveted pants, they knew they had to use a different word: overalls. Today, the word conjures up full-length denim garment with straps worn by farmers. But in the 19th century, overalls meant sturdy pants worn by cowboys, lumberjacks, and laborers. Downey writes something brilliant here in the book. They understand that the product they were about to put on the market was both familiar and new. Jacob, as a tailor, knew how to make a garment that men would want to wear, that they were used to wearing. What was new was the rivets. Customers could see them there, reinforcing the pockets, but the pants were not so strange that men would not want to try them. Both familiar and new. And this is a framework you can apply to anything you're building right now. Too familiar? No competitive advantage, no moat. Too new? No adoption. No one's going to try it. The rivets were a slight improvement on something that already existed, but they captured huge market share and almost all the profits. Why? Because the improvement was this. It was visible. You could see the rivets. It was functional. Pockets didn't tear. It was defendable. There was a patent. It was scalable. It was easy to manufacture. And this is the difference between innovation theater and true, real innovation. Real innovation solves a specific problem for a specific customer in a way that's demonstrably better than any alternative. Now, you might be asking about the two-horse trademark. Communicating without words in 1886, Levi Strauss and Company redesigned the leather patch on all their overalls. Instead of just text, the company name, address, patent information, that they created an image. They wanted an image, that explained everything. Well, two horses, each attached to a harness, each attached to a pair of riveted overalls, trying to tear them apart and failing. And above the horse, a banner, copper riveted. This design too was quickly registered as a trademark and is still in use today on your Levi's. But here's why it mattered. Some new Westerners were either illiterate or did not speak English as their first language. Many people navigated the world through symbols. Think of 3 balls outside a pawn shop, the striped barber pole. A man could walk into a store and ask for the overalls with the 2 horses on the label. And yes, I realize I say hoss as opposed to horse. But that aside, what is this? What is the symbology? What is the important symbology? It's communication leverage. Understanding that your customer at such a deep level that you could design for their problems, for their constraints, not the constraints you wish they had, but actual constraints. And it reminds me of the podcast revolution happening right now. There's a technological shift with online video and audio, immediately accessible to everyone worldwide. What's that done is turn the spoken word into a tool with the same reach as the printed word. It's a Gutenberg revolution in the domain of audio and video. And why does it matter? Because lots of people can listen if they haven't got time to watch. But not everyone can read. The average person reads less than 1 book a year. 1 book a year. But they can consume dozens of hours of podcasts just like this. Levi understood this in 1886. You don't require literacy when you can communicate through images. So what did success actually look like? Well, by the end of the 1870s, just a few years after introducing riveted overalls, Levi Strauss and Company had posted sales of $3 million in 1870 dollars. That's an order of magnitude more than ever before. But let me give you context for what running a business looked like in 1870 San Francisco. Operating costs were brutal. Insurance against losses while goods were being shipped, obviously water damage from the voyage, there was theft, freight rates from New York to San Francisco, anywhere from 10 to 50% of the value of the cargo. There were fees to pilots and harbor masters and wharf owners and custom duties and transportation from boat to warehouse and warehouse rent and annual city license fees, which fluctuated based on monthly receipts. And yet, even with all these expenses, the business thrived. Why? Because Levi had built something rare, a product that people actually needed, distribution through a system he controlled, protected by legal monopoly and sold by people who believed in it. And that's the formula. And it reminds me of Phil Knight, which is why Phil Knight was the episode before this. Not one element, all the elements together. The principles that built an empire. Principle 1, constraints create clarity. Levi didn't have the option to dabble, to experiment with multiple business ideas, to pivot every 6 months. He was driven by the need for economic autonomy, not as an abstraction, not as some idea, but purely for survival. And that constraint clarified everything. It eliminated distractions. It allowed him to focus his energy, to make the path forward obvious, to learn business deeply, to serve customers well, to build slowly, to survive setbacks and just keep going. Peter Thiel says competition is for losers. Build a monopoly. Not because competition is bad, but because competing in an overcrowded market forces you to optimize for all the wrong things. Levi wasn't competing with anyone. He was building a category. Wholesale dry goods in California during the gold rush where demand massively outstripped supply. And later, when he added riveted overalls, he had a 17-year patent monopoly. No competition. All he needed to do was focus on execution. Principle 2 to pay attention to. Specific knowledge compounds. Levi spent 20 years learning one business deeply. He didn't chase trends, not pivoting when things got hard, not wondering if there was a better opportunity elsewhere. Just relentless focus on understanding a few very important core things. Customers, suppliers, logistics, credit, distribution, quality, pricing, relationships. And when the opportunity came, Jacob's letter about riveted pants, Levi could move in 21 days because he'd done the work. If society can train you to do something, it can train someone else and replace you. Remember that. Levi's knowledge wasn't trainable. It was earned through decades of observation, decades of experimentation, and decades of pattern recognition. And here's the thing. Specific knowledge looks like obsession before it looks like expertise. While Levi was building his knowledge, nobody was writing articles about him. Nobody was calling him a visionary. Nobody even knew who he was. He was just some guy in San Francisco selling fabric. But that just is doing enormous work. Because just, inverted commas, selling fabric for 20 years means you understand fabric, customers, logistics, credit, and markets better than anyone else alive. And when an innovation appears, rivets on pants, you're the only person that's perfectly positioned to capitalize on it. Principle 3, play long-term games with long-term people. Levi's suppliers were his family. His employees was his relatives. Everyone lived in the same house. Sometimes there were 20 people under one roof. They all worked together. They all took care of each other. And this wasn't sentimental. This is strategic. Aligned incentives, complete trust, shared upside, no agency problems. When financial panics hit, Levi's didn't have to worry about suppliers cutting him off. When shipments went down at sea, his family didn't abandon him. When he needed capital, he didn't have to pitch to strangers. This is the ultimate competitive advantage. People will stay with you when things get hard. Not because of some piece of paper that you've signed, not because of contractual obligation, not because you're paying them, but because their success is your success. And today, we've lost this. We have become atomized. We have become silos. Nuclear families spread across different cities. Relatives become strangers. Work and home are separate spheres. And maybe someone could argue that's progress, but I think we've lost something valuable in this. When Levi needed help, he had 20 people living under one roof who would do anything for him. How many of us can say that today? I have no family. Zero. I have a brother, but I don't speak to him as often as I'd like. Principle 4, independence beats optimization. Levi could have optimized for cheaper suppliers, better payment returns, higher margins, but he optimized for something far more valuable. We saw this with Disney, and it's control. Control over his supply chain, control over his quality, control over timing, control over who he did business with. And it's also the Ford lesson, by the way. It's also the Rockefeller lesson. It's the Steve Jobs lesson. Vertical integration isn't about efficiency. It's about resilience. When you control the full stack, you can survive shocks that would destroy any of your competitors, and probably will. When the panic of 1855 hit, wholesalers who depended on Eastern credit went bankrupt. Levi survived because he didn't need external credit. When ships went down, Levi rebuilt faster because he controlled the supply. Do you remember when Onitsuka cut off Phil Knight? Knight survived because he'd already started manufacturing his own shoe. Independence is insurance against catastrophe. Principle 5, patience is the ultimate leverage. Levi was 23 when he arrived in San Francisco. He was 43 when he partnered with Jacob Davies on riveted pants. 20 years of building before his, inverted commas, overnight success, as Ray Kroc would say. Most people can't do this. They want results now. They want validation now. They want the market to confirm that they're on the right path now. But the market doesn't care about your timeline. The market rewards those who can wait longer than everyone else. And Levi could wait. Levi could wait because he was profitable, not dependent on external capital. He also loved the work. He wasn't waiting for an exit. He was building specific knowledge, which compounded daily. He was aligning his partners, which was his family, so they were missionaries, not mercenaries. This is what Jeff Bezos means when he talks about the long-term thinking as a competitive advantage. Not because long-term thinking isn't virtuous, but because most people just can't do it. Most of us, including myself, are optimizing for quarterly results, for 90-day payments, for investor updates, for social proof, for external validation. And Levi was optimizing for building something that would last. And it did. Levi Strauss and Company is still family owned today, over 150 years later. The wisdom of Mr. Strauss late in his life. Levi had a conversation with one of his salesmen, a man named Joe, who was running around stressed, arguing with department heads, intensely discussing problems everywhere, all the time. Levi walked up to Joe and asked if he could see him in his office. When Joe sat down, Levi asked, "Joe, did you have a good year?" Joe proceeded to tell his boss what a fantastic year he had. Levi listened quietly and patiently until Joe finished. Then he said, "Remember, Joe, the more business you do, the more problems and trouble you have." End of conversation. Christmas greetings were exchanged, and Joe got up and left. Joe never forgot that talk. He spoke of Levi with great admiration every chance he could. I want you to think about that wisdom. The more business you do, the more problems and troubles you will have. Levi understood something most founders learn way too late. Growth creates complexity, and complexity creates fragility. More revenue equals more customers equals more problems, more employees equals more coordination, equals more communication, equals more overhead, equals more locations, equals more logistics, equals more points of failure. This isn't an argument against growth. It's a reminder that growth is a tool. It's not the goal. You grow to serve more customers, to solve bigger problems, to create more value. But you don't grow for its own sake. Because unconstrained growth kills more companies than stagnation, than slowing down. During the week of September 1902, Levi began to feel unwell. On Wednesday the 24th, he felt bad enough that the doctors and a nurse were called into the house. Liver congestion was the diagnosis. Levi was ordered to bed rest. By Friday the 26th, he felt well enough to have dinner with the rest of the family. Remember, Levi's entire extended family lived in the same house. 20 people, multiple generations, all working in the same business, all taking care of each other. A nurse had been in attendance earlier in the week and was still on hand as Levi went to bed at 8 p.m. A little while later, the nurse heard him groaning. She went to his bedside and asked how he felt. He said, "Oh, about as comfortable as I can under the circumstances." He then turned his head on his pillow and peacefully died. Levi Strauss was 73 years old. He never married. He had no children, but he had family, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, whom he employed, whom he mentored, and who he enriched. He created a legacy. And he left behind something more valuable than biological descendants. He left behind an institution that would outlive him by generations. Levi Strauss & Company is still privately owned by the Strauss family today, still making jeans, still operating on the principles Levi established over 150 years ago. To my friend Keller Parker, that is legacy. Not what you've accumulated, but what you built that continues without you. So what does this mean for you? What's the toolkit? What can Levi teach us all? Let me distill Levi's story into principles that you can apply straight after listening to this podcast. Number one, constraints or gifts. Levi didn't have access to venture capital. He couldn't pivot easily. He couldn't raise a Series A or a pre-seed to cover mistakes. But those constraints, they forced clarity. Your toolkit is to identify your constraints and use them as a focusing mechanism to limit your capability, to limit your time, to limit your priorities, to limit your commitments. Don't curse your constraints. Use them as leverage. Number 2, specific knowledge takes time. Levi spent 20 years learning the dry goods business before partnering with Jacob Davis. 20 years of pattern recognition, 20 years of customer relationships, 20 years of operational expertise. So I want you to stop optimizing for breadth. Go deep on one thing, learn it from every angle, study it obsessively, build knowledge that cannot be taught in a classroom, and then lastly, be patient. You won't see the compounding returns for years, but when they arrive, they'll be exponential. Family is a competitive advantage. If you have it, use it. Levi's suppliers were his family. His employees were his relatives. Everyone lived under one roof. They had an aligned incentive. They had complete trust. They had no agency problems. So your toolkit is to build with people who share your values, who share your timeline, who can share your upside, not just employees, but believers, not just partners, but family, whether that be literal or metaphorical. The quality of your relationships determine the resilience of your business. Number 4, independence enables resilience. Levi optimized for control, not efficiency. He used family suppliers even when other options were probably far cheaper. But that independence saved him during every financial panic, every shipwreck, and every crisis. So for you, remember, vertical integration matters. Control critical dependencies, own your distribution, build systems that don't depend on the goodwill of strangers that only want your money. Independence is expensive, but fragility, being fragile, is far more expensive. Number 5, remember, recognition requires preparation. Levi decided on Jacob's proposal in 3 weeks, but that was only because he had spent 20 years preparing for that decision. Your job is to position yourself for luck, to build expertise in an area you care about, to develop relationships with people who innovate, and to stay close to the problem. When opportunity appears, you won't need months of analysis. You'll just know. Number 6, communicate for your actual customer. The 2-horse trademark, it wasn't artistic expression. It's functional communication for customers who can't read English. Design for real constraints, not ideal constraints. If your customers can't read technical documentation, use video. If they don't have reliable internet, optimize for offline. If they're time constrained, ruthlessly simplify. Don't make customers adapt to you. You should be adapting to them. Number 7, patience compounds. 20 years from arrival to partnership. 20 more years from partnership to empire. Extend your time horizon. Optimize for what you can sustain indefinitely, not what maximizes short-term metrics. Ask yourself, can I do this for 10 years? What about 20 years? And do I want to? If not, you're building the wrong thing. Every episode we end with a challenge. So this week's challenge is an easy one. Here's what I want you to do. Step 1, I want you to identify your constraints. I want you to write down the 3 biggest constraints on your ability to build right now. Not complaints, constraints. And maybe it's limited capital. You don't have enough money right now. Maybe it's limited time. You're running around trying to do a million things. Maybe it's limited expertise. You haven't become an expert yet. Don't try to eliminate them. Ask, how can I use these constraints to force myself to make better decisions? Number 2, I want you to audit your specific knowledge. What have you been learning about obsessively for years that most people just don't know yet? Not your job title, not your degree, but the actual specific knowledge you've accumulated through practice, through observation, and genuine curiosity. I want you to write it down, and I want you to be specific. And then I want you to ask the question, how can I position myself to recognize opportunities in this domain when they appear? Step 3, evaluate your relationships. What are you building with? And are those people in it for the long term? Or until something better comes along? And do your incentives align? Or are you constantly negotiating? Would they stick with you through a financial panic, through a shipwreck, through a crisis? If they wouldn't, if you think they wouldn't, you're not playing long-term games with long-term people. Step 4, I want you to extend your timeline. I want you to ask yourself, what would I build if I knew it would take 20 years before it worked? Same thing I asked you with Phil Knight. Not that would be impressive, not that would guarantee funding, not that it would look good on your social media page, but what would you build that you'd enjoy building for 20 years, even if it never made you rich financially? Because if you can find out that, guess what? You've just found your calling. And if you can find your calling, go build that. It'll never let you down. The red string theory. I like to connect the dots. What has every founder taught us? What has every founder we've studied on this show to now taught us? Well, they've taught us different lessons. Ford, he taught us democratize through vertical integration. He basically controlled the full stack and lower prices at scale. Edison taught us autonomy enables innovation. Create the conditions where you can work on what matters most. Disney taught us control protects vision. Own the IP and distribution or someone else will come and corrupt it. Walton taught us simplicity scales, fancy fails. Complex systems create friction. Simple ones compound. Jobs taught us integration creates magic. Control the experience end to end. Ray Kroc taught us platforms beat products. Don't sell hamburgers. Sell systems that enable others to sell hamburgers. Rockefeller taught us domination beats competition every time. And Phil Knight taught us belief is contagious. Build a religion, not a product. And Levi Strauss in this episode, he teaches us maybe the most patient truth. Preparation is opportunity. You just can't see it until you're ready. What connects these founders? Well, number one, they all played long-term games. Ford spent years perfecting the Model T before scaling. Edison spent years in Menlo Park before the light bulb. Disney spent years building a studio before Disneyland. Walton spent years running a single store before creating Walmart. Jobs spent years in the wilderness before building the iMac. Rockefeller spent years consolidating before Standard Oil. Knight spent years selling shoes from his trunk before he built Nike. And Levi spent years learning dry goods before the blue riveted jeans. None of them optimized for quick wins. All of them optimized for sustainable advantage. They also all built from specific knowledge. Ford knew manufacturing. Edison knew electricity. Disney knew animation. Walton knew retail. Jobs knew design. Rockefeller knew oil. Knight knew shoes. And Levi's knew textiles. They didn't dabble. They went deep. They built knowledge that couldn't be replicated by reading a book or taking a course or listening to a great podcast. They all controlled critical dependencies. Ford owned the factories. Edison owned the patents. Disney owned the IP. Walton owned the distribution. Jobs owned the ecosystem. Rockefeller owned the refineries. And Knight owned the brand. And Levi owned the supplier relationships and a patent on something genius. They understood that independence beats efficiency. They all, every single one of them, built with believers, not employees. Ford had engineers who shared his vision. Edison had what he called the muckers, who worked for the reason of just being free, not salary. Disney had 9 old men. Walton had store managers. Jobs had his pirates who wanted to change the world. Rockefeller had his lieutenants. Knight had Bauman and Johnson who believed that running was sacred. And Levi had his family who could share on the upside of everything they did. None of them built alone. All of them built with people who cared as much as they did. Number 5, they all waited longer than everyone else. Every single founder we have studied in season 1 and now in season 2, often a decade or more of them just doing the thing that most people wouldn't consider as important. Where they were grinding, they were learning, they were building, and they were surviving, but they continued. When nobody was writing articles about them, nobody was calling them visionaries, nobody even knew who they were. And then suddenly, to outside observers, they were an overnight success and they made it. But it wasn't sudden. We know this because we study them. It was compounding. For Ford, compounding was manufacturing knowledge. For Edison, it was compounding invention systems. For Disney, it was compounding storytelling. For Walton, it was compounding operational efficiencies. And for Jobs, it was compounding design taste. For Rockefeller, it was compounding market control. Knight compounded brand belief. And Levi compounded customer relationships. The overnight success story is a lie. It's always a lie. Luck is always preparation meeting opportunity over time. And that's not the last of the red strings. They all understood that building something meaningful requires becoming someone capable of building something meaningful. And becoming that person That takes time. Not months, not quarters, not years, but decades. Levi didn't become the man who could recognize Jacob's opportunity in 3 weeks by reading business books. He might have if he listened to this podcast, but he became the man by spending 20 years in the arena, making sales calls, managing inventory, extending credit, surviving panics, shipping gold, absorbing losses, and building relationships. And when the opportunity arrived, riveted pants, he was ready. Part luck, mostly smarts. Mostly because he'd done the work that made readiness possible. And here's the thing nobody wants to hear, the thing that will infuriate you. There's no shortcuts. You can't hack your way to specific knowledge. You can't hack your way to deep customer understanding. You can't life hack your way to resilience under pressure. You can't outsource your way to prepared judgment. You just have to do the time. You have to put in the years. You have to build specific knowledge. You have to build the relationships. You have to build the judgment. You have to create and curate the taste, and you will learn the intuition. And then maybe, if you're lucky, and luck still has to come, if you've positioned yourself correctly, an opportunity will appear. Maybe you'll have 21 days to decide. But when it comes, you'll know. You'll know exactly what to do. Not because you're smart, not because you're ready, but because you've always been doing the work. And that's the red string. Preparation is the only form of luck that compounds. My final thought to close this is this. What if the worst thing that could happen to you isn't failure, but succeeding at something you don't believe in? Levi Strauss could have stayed in New York, could have worked for his brothers, could have built a respectable career in the family business. It would have been safe, comfortable, predictable. And I would assume he'd be miserable. Levi didn't want safety. He wanted agency. He got legacy. The ability to build something of his own, to make his own decisions, to succeed or fail on his own terms. So at 23, gets on a boat, and he goes to Panama. He risks his life crossing a jungle where highwaymen murdered travelers and arrives in San Francisco with no contacts, no customers, and no guarantees. And he spends 20 years building, not waiting, building, learning, serving, surviving, absorbing. Not because he knew it would lead to the blue jeans, because the work itself mattered. And when the opportunity arrived, a letter from a tailor about riveted pants, he was ready. He knew. He just knew. Because he had spent 20 years becoming the kind of person who would know. That's the lesson of Levi Strauss. Not that you need a great idea. Not that you need perfect timing. Not that you need venture capital or accelerators or incubators or a Stanford degree. You need patience. Patience to build specific knowledge in a domain you actually care about. Patience to play long-term games with people you actually trust. Patience to wait for the opportunity that only you, because of your unique combination of experiences and expertise, are positioned to recognize. And then when it appears, the courage to move and move quickly. 3 weeks, not 3 months, not 3 years. Because you've done the work. You were ready. What would I build if I knew it would take 20 years before it worked? You got this. Sobobona. I see you. Till next time.